Hello everyone. Today I'm hosting two special guests here with me. Arkady Korsbeck, CISO of DMGT, and Dave Klein, Security Evangelist Director at Cymulate. How are you two doing?
Doing great.
Great. Happy to be here.
Pleasure to have you both. So Arkady, DMGT is an organization with long history. Can you share a bit about the information security team and how the Cymulate technology fits in your day-to-day operations?
Sure. So DMGT is a private equity firm. There are a number of companies in our portfolio. And most of them are either in media, new media, or business services. And the companies vary in size, the level of complexity, and the markets in which they operate in, and regulatory requirements they subject to. So within each operating company will be its own team, and the team size varies from 1 person to 14. So its portfolio is very diverse, and every team would use the tools slightly differently depending on their level of maturity. For more advanced use cases, there are a number of different scenarios which are being tested. The way we started with the tool was sort of opportunistic. We were trying to modernize our endpoint security platform. And we wanted to run a consistent set of tests across a number of different products to compare them and sort of remove bias out of the tool and really test the tool efficacy. Mm-hmm. So that's how I personally started and my team started this breach and attack simulation with a very narrow and simple use case. Let's just go through a number of different tools, run the same regression and see what's coming back. And it was kind of eye-opening to see the level of detail you can get out of this and how you can get control efficacy through a large number of test scenarios and how quickly you can get to benchmark and comparisons. Mm-hmm. So that was our sort of initial foray into this. From that point, we started testing efficacy of other controls within our architecture, from proxies to email to WAF, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. So you certainly must satisfy within the organization various stakeholders, NetOps, DevOps, and other business owners. So yet they don't have the security expertise of yourself and others as well. So how did Cymulate help the decision-making process in terms of visibility, investments, and priorities along the day-to-day?
I think it's very helpful to have an informed conversation, right? So there is always organic tension between security teams and IT teams, or security teams and DevOps teams, or security teams and development. Mm-hmm. But once you start looking at the factual data, then you can have informed debates around this, what to do about it. So it's very hard to prove a negative. Like typically the team that says, well, we haven't been hacked, so we're good. And yet we know that there is really difficult environment out there. There are threat actors are very active. So we see new campaigns every day, and teams, security teams would pay attention to threat intelligence and all this news. But and IT teams are fairly busy, right? So they're just trying to keep the boat afloat and having run a test, look at the test results, and have discussions around control efficacy and control configuration based on practical tests, right? Based on tactical tools and techniques which are being used by the ongoing campaigns. So it becomes timely and relevant. Mm-hmm. So having timely, relevant, and informed discussions enables us to prioritize our work to optimize our architecture, right, and reduce risk for every dollar spent or for every hour spent, and also enable us to identify the gaps in the architecture and have informed discussions about the roadmap and prioritization of projects.
Makes sense. So, in your in a case study we've done together, you mentioned that DMGT is continually active in mergers and acquisitions. That is probably a giant headache for a security professional such as yourself. So does Cymulate technology assist in assessing potential risk or a gap within that merger and acquisition process? Do you have any thought using it as part of your future due diligence processes?
Well, we're still evolving our due diligence playbook. There is only so much you can do during due diligence. What I do like to do after the acquisition is to establish a baseline. Because what happened in the past, you didn't have any control over, but you want to know where you stand right now. And it's a very good tool to quickly establish a baseline, and again, having an informed discussion. Maybe a company have never undertaken a red team exercise, or have not undertaken it recently. Having a fairly low level of investment to deploy the tool on board onto our portal and run the baseline and clearly see where things stand, and try to have a discussion about potential level of investment which is needed to get to the level where we are comfortable with the current architecture in a way it mitigates emerging threats.
Great. So Dave, integration post-business acquisition may pose many potential risks, right? So not only from technology gaps such as a morphic network or under-secured applications. Exposure may come from getting the people and processes to work together. So what does a modern CISO need to reduce the risk, the attack surface during the merger?
Well, the first thing they need to do is gain visibility. And once you have that visibility, you're able to find those gaps, those vulnerabilities, whether it be in security controls or processes or things like that. And then you're able to really shore up those processes and security controls easier, right? So the idea is once you have the visibility, you see where the problems are, you're able to explain the risk and the risk profile that this new acquisition causes, and able to fix it quickly.
Great. So, Arkady, you also mentioned that you're concerned with ransomware. I mean, it's a global thing, right? So can you elaborate a bit on that concern and how does it look from your side?
I mean, one of our portfolio companies is DMGT, and we've seen a number of attacks on newspapers. Of course, we were concerned whether our controls are resilient enough to detect and prevent those attacks. We always, it's an ongoing concern, right? You can never be too sure. So we took a number of steps to improve our resilience, and Cymulate provides sort of continuous testing around endpoint controls and efficacy. Ability to detect malicious actors in our environment.
Great, great. You also mentioned unintended consequences. Can you give an example to what these are, these consequences?
Modern environments are fairly complex, and they usually undergo quite a bit of change. Just think about all the changes happening in your environment, from network configuration changes to group policy configuration changes to email rules changes. Certificates expire, disks get filled up, processes die, things happen. How do you know that your controls are still operating today the same way they were operating yesterday? So to me, having a good regression test suite that they can run periodically to get that level of validation, to make sure that everything still works the way expected to work, is critical. I'm a big believer in applying software development methodologies to managing complex architectures. So in software development, it's very common to have a QA function, or development having responsibility for QA function, and running regression tests, and those regression tests will give team velocity. So that's why Testing is automated, testing is part of CI/CD pipelines, and you can do frequent releases. So we're trying to adopt the same patterns within our cybersecurity architecture for two reasons. One is, again, to deal with the content configuration churn, and to have telemetry come in to help us identify the gaps in our architecture. Cymulate provides emerging threat feeds and provides additional test cases emulating TTPs that attackers would use. And the fact that I don't need to spend time developing that test case, managing the test case, provides tremendous leverage to my team. So the way we run it, we know that the tests are timely and current and relevant, and we can reflect on them and reflect on our current control and their efficacy, and understand where we need to make additional investments and forward-looking statements, right? But also make sure that the configuration and hygiene and posture is maintained through the constant change and churn of the environment.
That's a great framework. So, Arkady, many CISOs today are challenged with consistent security across platform environments, networks, and systems. They don't know if the security policy they like to apply is indeed configured and enforced. Do you agree with this statement, and how does Cymulate help you with achieving consistency? I mean, I think we have talked a bit about this, but let's just put it into.
Again, the regulatory regime within each operating company is different. So looking through the compliance lens within my portfolio, it would be quite different. Some companies have SOC 2, some companies have ISO 27001, some companies don't have any need for any sort of external audits. So in my particular use case, I can't speak to the details as to how my teams are using it. It would be different. So we don't particularly map to the compliance frameworks. We mostly focusing on emerging threats, right, and threat-informed defense. So this is key to me. Within security space, there is always so many things that you could be doing, right? But how would you know what you're optimizing risk reduction for every hour spent or every dollar spent? You can look at it through the compliance lens, and that's needed. Or you can look at it through a threat-informed defense lens to understand how the attackers may go after you, sort of understanding the threat actors and their tools, tactics, and procedures, and testing that in your environment will give you visibility into the gaps, right? And that's where you can make investments, and that's how you can continuously optimize your architecture and measure your cyber resilience and demonstrate the improvement to stakeholders, right? And that's how you can ask for additional investments when needed.
Well, cyber resilience is an emerging concept in the last 2 years. It is starting to be more and more perceived. So Dave, most enterprises do with this challenge is adding defensive technologies and automation capabilities such as SIEMs, SOAR systems, but not only. In most cases, it results in an overcomplicated security operation. Can a tool like Cymulate that provides continuous validation simplify it in some sort of a manner?
Big time. I think simplification is really, really important to think about. And the idea is by doing that offensive testing, you're beginning to understand what is essential and what is overlap. So overlap can go away and can simplify in that manner. And also, just by practicing and doing this testing, you are shoring up your people, your processes, and your things. And in practicing, people start to understand it, so it becomes more easy for them to understand it in a simplified fashion.
Great. Arkady, tell us about some insights you've gotten from the first time you've used the Cymulate platform. What was an eye-opening for you?
I didn't expect to see how much email will actually get through our email defenses. It was also surprising how much bad traffic can get through our proxy defenses.
Okay.
It was within the line of expectations for our endpoint. 'Cause again, we've sort of done that in the past, and that's how we entered that space. It was interesting to see the trends, right? So like I said, we use the tool to establish the baseline. So you are where you are, right? So now what are we going to do about it? And measure velocity of improvement. So we could actually look at the tool a month later and say, hey, we improved our metrics here, here, and here.
Mm-hmm.
And our target now, by executing this project, we should see the metrics improve in this space as well. So you kind of like make a hypothesis about the technology investment, make that investment, and then see that it pan out or not.
And you have seen the improvement over time based on the mitigations that you performed following the assessment results.
Right. So that's threat-informed defense. So we see weakness, we decide to make some investments, whether it's time, or whether it's budget, whether it's capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And after that investment, we can see and reflect whether the metrics moved or not.
Great. What was your experience from the deployment, the onboarding, the support that you received and your teams received continuously along the license period?
So we looked at a number of different breach and attack simulation tools, and what was important to me is time to value. Within my portfolio, my teams are small. They have limited capacity to dedicate to a tool like this. The reason we went with Cymulate was fairly quick time to value and relatively low effort to deploy and get started with the baseline. It didn't require a lot in terms of configuration and deployment, and it didn't require a lot of time and effort or mind share to get the basic testing baseline going. And from there, we could start to mature and invest more and go deeper and broader. But the level of effort to get to initial baseline and to have informed conversations around the state of cybersecurity architecture was very appealing to me and to the team.
Excellent, thanks. Dave, Arkady talks about fast and easy deployment.
Yes.
Okay, so is there even a chance that to good defenses that aren't easy to use, can they compete with it? Or how can a business enterprise balance between the need for comprehensive security and the need for easy, and how does Cymulate serve that purpose?
So on ease of use, and I think Arkady, you did a great job talking about the time to value. It has to be quick and easy to adopt. I think it's really important. You know, things need to be easy to deploy. You need to get results within the first hour or first day. It can't be a long extended contract, and education. It has to be done quick and in a fast fashion. I think there's also the need to make it accessible so that you have staff of varying skill sets. As we know, there's a lot of problems finding people with skill sets in cybersecurity. So even the beginners need to be able to go through, utilize that solution, and get results from it. And then for the people who are very skilled, they're able to either offload that responsibility or able to automate certain parts that are more mundane. I think finally, the biggest thing that often people tell me when I talk to them about ease of use and easy is the fact that we have all the updates. The immediate threats are updated, and it's actionable intelligence. It's not just reading a threat in the paper and then having to research it and code it, because you want a solution that does that for you. So basically, it becomes a situation where you hear about a new threat and you can test right away, immediately. And I think that's really kind of important too.
Exactly. So, Arkady, do you feel your company is more secure now? Can you explain our field operation folks here in the room with us why and what was the Cymulate contribution to your operations, to your security framework?
I think we are getting better, and Cymulate allows us, again, by establishing baseline and measuring the progress, demonstrate that, right? it's not a silver bullet, but the first step of having any sort of conversation is being informed about the current state, right? And just having that data is very valuable. We could have much better discussions around coverage, about control efficacy, about tool A versus tool B, right? About gaps or about overlap in defense, right? And where we need to make investments and where we could potentially recoup capital to make those investments, right? Again, in my role, I'm very strategic, right? And I need to be. There are people who look at the results at a very granular level to understand why this particular test had failed, right? And just knowing that something had failed will make people ask questions and investigate that and hopefully figure out what went wrong, what needs to change. Or if that cannot be changed, right, we clearly have a gap in technology, so we need to assess that and understand how we need to evolve our architecture to close that gap. So I look at it at the trend level, where my teams and different stakeholders within the team would look at it at a very detailed level. So think about like different personas within the organization would use the tool slightly differently, and there will be different use cases. For an executive team, having a summary of the level of cyber resilience and seeing it improve, give them a little bit of confidence, right? It's very macro level view. And also in conversation, a CISO and the team could have about the additional investments needed, the gaps in the architecture, and then demonstrate sort of risk reduction based on those investments, right? At a more operational level, you could verify your existing detection engineering SIM platforms, right? In terms of which use cases or which TTPs are being prevented, which are being detected, and where you have gaps, and you try to improve your architecture in a way you have more coverage in terms of detection and more coverage in terms of prevention. And you can see your tools evolve with it, right? So you can see your vendors making progress, and it all becomes measurable and demonstratable.
That's very important.
So even when you have a conversation with the vendor, it's much easier to say, hey, we run these tests, and your control didn't perform well. Do you have anything in your roadmap to address it? If not, well, maybe we should look into the market and see if there are any better tools out there who will keep up with evolving
Make them accountable.
tactics, tools, and techniques better than the existing vendor, right? So it's all about the OODA loop, right? The attackers react quickly, so should the defense mechanisms, whether it's your third parties, whether it's your products, and whether it's your teams. And all of that needs to be measurable to some extent. And the tool provides that level of visibility that you can have more informed conversations.
This is excellent, thanks. So thank you very much, Arkady, Dave.
Thank you.
Great conversation, very informative, and looking forward to speaking with you both again.
Very cool, thank you.